The Lunar Chronicles, Cinder by Marissa Meyer, page 13. Raising her fist, she thunked the android hard on the side of its head, barely catching it before it toppled over onto the table. The prince jumped. Cinder set the android back on its treads and jabbed the power button, but nothing happened. You'd be surprised how often that works. The prince let out a single awkward chuckle. Are you sure you're Linder Cinder? The mechanic? Cinder, I've got it. Echo wheeled out of the crowd and up to the work table, but her blue sensor flashing. Lifting one pronged hand, she slammed a brand new steel plated foot onto the desk. In the shadow of the prince's android, it's a huge improvement over the old one, only lightly used, and the wiring looks compatible as is. Plus, I was able to get the dealer down to just 600 univs. Panic jolted through Cinder, still balancing on her human leg. She snatched the foot off the table and dropped it behind her. Good work, Aiko. Nujin Shifu will be delighted to have a replacement foot for his escort droid. Aiko's sensor dimmed. Nujin Shifu? I don't compute. Smiling through locked teeth, Cinder gestured at the prince. Aiko, please pay your respects to our customer. She lowered her voice. His Imperial Highness. Aiko craned her head, aiming the round sensor up at the prince, who towered more than 3 feet above her. The light flared as her scanner recognized him. Prince Kai, she said, her metallic voice squeaking. You are even more handsome in person. Cinder's stomach twisted in embarrassment, even as the prince laughed. That's enough, Aiko. Get in the booth. Aiko obeyed, pushing aside the tablecloth and ducking under the table. You don't see a personality like that every day, said Prince Kai, leaning against the booth's door frame as if he brought androids to the market all the time. Did you program her yourself? Believe it or not, she came that way. I suspect a programming error, which is probably why my stepmother got her so cheap. I did not have a programming error, said Aiko from behind her. Cinder met the prince's gaze and was caught momentarily dazzled by another easy laugh, and ducked her head back behind his android. So what do you think? He asked. I'll need to run her diagnostics. It'll take me a few days, maybe a week. Tucking a strand of hair behind one ear, Cinder sat down grateful to give her leg a rest, while she examined the android's innards. She knew she must be breaking some rule of etiquette, but the prince didn't seem to mind, as he tipped forward watching her hands. Do you need payment up front? He held his left wrist towards her, embedded with his ID chip. But Cinder waved a glove at him. No, thank you. It'll be my honor. Prince Kaya looked about to protest, but then let his hand fall. I don't suppose there's any hope of having her done before the festival? Cinder shut the android's panel. I don't think that'll be a problem, but without knowing what's wrong with her. I know. He rocked back on his heels. Just wishful thinking. How will I contact you when she's ready? Send a comm to the palace. Or will you be here again next week? I could stop by then. Oh, yes, said Aiko from the back of the booth. We're here every market day. You should come by again. That would be lovely. Cinder flinched. You don't need to. It'll be my pleasure. He dipped his head in polite farewell, simultaneously pulling the edges of the hood farther over his face. Cinder returned the nod, knowing she should have stood and bowed, but not daring test her balance a second time. She waited until his shadow had disappeared from the tabletop before surveying the square. The prince's presence among the harried crowd seemed to have gone unnoticed. Cinder let her muscles relax. Aiko rolled to her side, clasping her metal grippers over her chest. Prince Kai! Check my fan. I think I'm overheating. Cinder bent over and picked up her replacement foot, dusting it off on her cargo pants. She checked the plating, glad that she hadn't dented it. Can you imagine Peony's expression when she hears about this? Said Aiko. I can imagine a lot of high-pitched squealing. Cinder allowed one more wary scan of the crowd before the first tickle of giddiness stirred inside her. She couldn't wait to tell Peony. The prince himself! An abrupt laugh escaped her. It was uncanny. It was unbelievable. It was, oh dear. Cinder's smile fell. What? Eiko pointed at her forehead with a pronged finger. You have a grease splotch. Cinder jerked back and scrubbed at her brow. You're kidding. I'm sure he hardly noticed. Cinder dropped her hand. What does it matter? Come on, help me put this on before any other royalty stops by. She propped her ankle on the opposite knee and began connecting the color-coordinated wires, wondering if the prince had been fooled. Fits like a glove, doesn't it? Aiko said, holding a handful of screws while Cinder twisted them into pre-drilled holes. It's very nice, Aiko. Thank you. I just hope Adri doesn't notice. She'd murder me if she knew I'd spent 600 univs on a foot. She tightened the last screw and stretched out her leg, rolling her ankle forward, back, wiggling the toes. It was a little stiff, and the nerve sensors would need a few days to harmonize with the updating wires. But at least she wouldn't have to limp around off-kilter anymore. It's perfect, she said, pulling on her boot. She spotted her old foot held in Aiko's pinchers. You can throw that piece of junk away. A scream filled Cinder's ears. She flinched, and the sound peaking in her audio interface, and turned toward it. The market silenced. The children who had switched to a game of hide and seek among the clustered booths crept out from their hiding spots. The scream had come from the baker, Chang Sacha. Baffled, Cinder stood and climbed to the top of her chair to peer over the crowd. She spotted Sacha in her booth behind the glass case of sweetbreads and pork buns, gawking at her outstretched hands. Cinder clamped a hand over her nose at the same moment realization skittered through the rest of the square. The plague! Someone yelled. She has the plague! The street filled with panic. Mothers scooped up their children, masking their faces with desperate hands as they scrambled to get away from Sacha's booth. Shopkeepers slammed shut their rolling doors. Santo screamed and rushed towards his mother, but she held her hands out to him. No, no, stay back. A neighboring shopkeeper grabbed the boy, tucking the child under his arm as he ran. Sacha yelled something after him, but the words were lost in the uproar. Cinder's stomach churned. They couldn't run, or Aiko would be trampled in the chaos. Holding her breath, she reached for the cord at the booth's corner and yanked the metal door down its rail. Darkness cloaked them, but for a single shard of daylight along the ground. The heat rose up from the concrete floor, stifling in the cramped space. Cinder, said Aiko, worry in her robotic voice. She brightened her sensor, washing the booth in blue light. Don't worry, Cinder said, hopping down from the chair and grabbing the grease-covered rag from the table. The screams were already fading, transforming the booth into its own empty universe. She's all the way across the square. We're fine here. But she slipped back towards the wall of shelves anyway, crouched down, and covered her nose and mouth with a rag. There they waited, Cinder breathing as shallowly as possible, until they heard the sirens of the emergency hover come and take Sacha away.